Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 17th episode of our Oreninc podcast series with Mercenary Geologist, Mr. Mickey Fulp himself, and Paul Harris joining us from London today. Hi, gentlemen.
Good
Hi,
afternoon.
Kai. Hi, Mickey.
Thanks again for taking the time. It's 8:30 where I am, 8:30 p.m. It's 7:30 where Paul is, and if I'm not mistaken, it's 12:30 p.m. as well for Mickey there in Arizona. So I appreciate everybody taking the time here.
I'm not in Arizona.
New Mexico. Sorry, always
That's
make that
okay.
blunder.
It's the desert, so.
I know. Same, but very different. So, we always have, a bunch of interesting topics prepared, and today we want to talk about the flurry of flow-through financings. And Mickey's going to take us through the price developments for platinum and palladium, while Paul's going to top it off with his sort of discoveries in the copper space and what's been happening and the relationship of Bitcoin and gold and how it all fits together. So I think we have a really interesting program here again. And over the next 10, 12 minutes, we'll go discover that and discuss those topics. As always, I'll start us off with talking about the Oreninc Index and what we're seeing here at Oreninc and what our data center sort of provides us with a market insight. And one thing we've noticed quite a bit in recent weeks is, and you probably as a good listener have noticed and good reader of Oreninc have noticed as well, is that the Oreninc Index has seen a tremendous increase. And just last week we spiked massively over our index mark of 100, closing at 120, which I think is a record. And I haven't seen anything as high as 120 since I've been with Oreninc. So, and only this week it's dropped down to 95, but that is still a very high number. And I think this is all contributed to all the flow through financings we're seeing at the end of this year. And one thing I want to discuss with you gentlemen real quick is why all of a sudden do company or have companies or investors been sitting on money just for the last 10 days of the year, waiting to get some tax returns filed and some tax dollars to safety just for those financings, or where does all of a sudden the interest come from?
Well, I think you must be exactly correct there, Kai. I don't ever remember this big a flurry of flow-through financings, but as an American, and none of us are Canadians, so the three of us, we don't get any benefit from flow-through financings, but smells very much of tax write-offs at the end of the year to reduce burdens on capital gains.
And any of our listeners have any input there? If any policy changes have happened, and because in my opinion, like from what I heard, last I heard is that flow through financings are still possible even in 2018. So this is not the last of it.
Yeah, and it may have something to do too with people don't have a lot of tax losses to burn, or let me say that differently. They've used up a lot of their carry back tax losses. In Canada, I think you can carry back 3 years, so perhaps that has something to do with it. Market was bad for such a long period of time, and maybe this is their only recourse to lessen their capital gains burden, if that makes sense.
No, it does actually, and I'm really looking forward to 2018 now because a lot of companies have to spend all that money by the end of 2018. So we should be seeing some news flow coming out of that as well. Um, Mickey, you wanted to talk about platinum and palladium here and the price developments. And why don't you start us off in that regard and talk about the white metals?
Yeah, the white metals, the PGMs. I've never seen anything like this. Uh, Precious metals have been fluctuating over the last few months, but very correlative with the movements, or negative with the movements of the US dollar index. Uh, that said, platinum has had an extended period of weakness. On Thursday, now there's been some recoveries, but the platinum to gold ratio hit 0.70. That's a historic low since gold was floated on international markets in January of 1970. And the platinum to palladium ratio hit 0.86, and that's the low since April of 2000. And if for older guys like me, we remember that period of time because that's when the Russians put a ban on palladium exports, and GMC, the giant US automaker, hoarded a bunch of platinum and ended up taking $1 billion write-off on that. Uh, it's quite amazing that we have a palladium supply deficit, yet a platinum surplus. Um, and it's my opinion this is nothing more than a short-term phenomenon because both these metals, especially palladium, is used solely in catalytic converters and uh, and for gasoline uh, driven automobiles versus diesel. So in the US, gasoline is much cheaper than diesel. A lot of that has to do with state taxes, but I don't think this can last very long because the reason that palladium back in the 90s and 2000s it was so much cheaper than platinum, it's not nearly as good a catalyst. So it would be my contention that if this price imbalance continues, that automakers with their OEMs, original equipment manufacturers, will convert back to platinum because it's a much better catalyst, even for gasoline motors.
So do you think it's a speculative bubble based on the EV boom, the electric vehicle boom, that everybody's banging or banking more on lithium, cobalt, and vanadium perhaps instead of platinum?
I don't think so because that doesn't explain the significant rise in palladium. I didn't mention that platinum's up about 1% this year, and palladium is up over 50% this year. So it really has to do with the demand for palladium.
Interesting. Where do you see the demand for palladium coming from, though?
Look at US and Chinese automakers, record years, gasoline motors.
Okay. Yeah. So but there's no new industry emerging that's sucking up all the supply.
In my opinion, it's got nothing to do with the electrical vehicle market because the demand for palladium is increasingly strong, and we have a supply deficit for palladium as opposed to platinum, which is in supply surplus right now.
Interesting. No, I briefly mentioned it, and I think that's a good way to lead over to Paul here as well. It's like I mentioned lithium for a second, and Paul, starting before we started recording, we briefly discussed the deals we've seen in the lithium space, and perhaps you want to give us a quick update what we've seen here just today, actually.
Well, a couple this week with Bacanora, which has the Sonora project in Mexico. They put out a resource in the last few days, and just today or yesterday, I think, announced that they pulled in a big investor from China. And Kai, you're saying that another company's just one I haven't seen the release for has done a similar deal today.
Yes, no, Lithium X is being bought out by Next View New Energy, a Chinese group, all cash apparently.
Yes, so again, the Chinese investors are looking to put their foot on potential future supply of lithium. It's good investment in the value chain there. So China's obviously taking the lithium industry very, very, very seriously indeed.
Now, leading over, actually touching on lithium and the energy metals, copper is also, let's say, a semi-energy metal, and we've seen a recent price dip below the $3 mark, but copper's rallied back. What happened, Paul?
Well, I think that the demographics, or if you like, the fundamentals in the copper space very clearly point to market deficit disappearing over the next within the next 18 months. I mean, it's very difficult to put the finger on when that will happen exactly, but most analysts think sort of next 12 to 18 months, copper will be in deficit again, and prices will supply and demand dictate they'll go up. New supply isn't coming on stream. There's no big projects, or very, very few big projects. There's very few medium-sized projects waiting in the wings to be permitted. And even if the projects that are waiting in the wings are permitted, they wouldn't meet the forecast increase in demand. So you've got a structural supply demand situation that is tending towards higher medium to longer term copper prices. Those fundamentals have been in place for quite a while now, well recognized by the market. It's, I guess the copper game is playing out as people have been calling it for the last sort of 12 to 18 months. The inventories are being used up, and they're sort of going down, and perhaps some point towards the end of next year we'll be in an even supply situation and then into deficit.
Well, the supply demand balance of copper is usually very tight, and a lot of it has to do with supply disruptions, which we've seen this year. And with the change in labor laws in Chile, I think there are also massive strikes looming in Chile in the coming year, and that probably has something to do with it too. I'd like to comment too that copper is the energy metal. It's the electrical metal. You can't generate any kind of electricity without copper transformers. So the electrical vehicle, hybrid vehicle market is very bullish for copper too.
That's true. That's true. And actually, that leads me also to our last segment of every interview series, is the number of the week. And I'm sure we've all picked some good numbers again. And Paul, why don't you start us off today?
Okay. Well, my number of the week is, I think it's about 17,300. Any guesses, guys?
No. Don't tell me it's the Bitcoin price in US dollars.
Yeah, apparently that was what Bitcoin was worth at some point last week. One Bitcoin was up to $17,300.
I think we've even touched 20,000 yesterday.
Really? Well, quite possible. This is from last week.
So, Mickey, what's your number?
If you look at the curve, and it's just exponential, it looks like a moonshot.
That's insane, yeah.
My number this week is 3.8%, and it has to do with platinum and palladium, and that is the number of days since January of 1970 that the price of platinum has been less than the price of palladium. And right now that ratio is about 0.86. So quite unusual, a big anomaly here. And really the reason that I bought platinum on Thursday of last week.
Leveraged?
Yeah, with the idea that it's so undervalued, especially with respect to gold, that at some point that will normalize and it will come back to at least par with gold.
And I'm going to end our session here today with my number of the week, and it's touching on what Paul mentioned earlier. It's copper and the companies that are getting financed into space. So my number is our number one financing of November 2017. That's SolGold's financing of roughly 75.6 million Canadian dollars. So that was the biggest financing in the copper space, or not in the mining space, in November 2017. So
I think we can add another number onto that. I think 10 to 12. They'll have in January one of the biggest exploration drilling campaigns underway anywhere. They'll have, I think, about 12 rigs, up to 12 rigs operating.
Has anybody told Sean Roosen about that?
I haven't.
No, because I thought he was competing for that title, and with 800,000 meters at Windfall.
Oh, and that's not infill drilling or anything like that. That's pure exploration.
Yeah, no, that's impressive. It was 120 million, if I remember correctly. They want to spend next year. That's just crazy.
That's bonkers.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time again. Merry Christmas. I don't think we'll tape another episode in the next 3 days here. As always, your time is much appreciated. Happy holidays, and we'll hear from each other in the new year. Thank you so much.
Happy holidays to you and yours.
Happy holidays, everybody. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.